All right, thank you so much for tuning in today. I'm Travis Markham. I'm Director of Education for Austin Classical Guitar. This is Jeremy Osborne, my colleague at ACG, and we're so privileged to have Juan Cavazos. He's the guitar teacher from San Marcos High School, as well as a band director and directs the Latin ensembles, correct?
I do. I direct the salsa band at San Marcos High School and also the mariachi ensemble, and been a band director for the last 12, 13 years. So a little bit of a different journey, but here I am teaching finally my primary instrument. So it's really cool.
Yeah, you have a unique background in that you studied classical guitar in school, got certified to teach band primarily.
Yes.
And now, sort of mid-career are finding your way back to teaching guitar. Can you speak just a little bit about how you got here?
Yeah, absolutely. So what happened, especially, so obviously I went to school. We didn't have guitar in my middle school or high school, so I had to do percussion, which is it's cool, it's fun, a lot of fun. But then there was a guitar class that was actually designed to start the mariachi program. This is Eagle Pass High School back in 1996, and so I did that, and I had a blast. I kind of learned guitar and percussion, in parallel. And when I got to college, when I got to Texas State, I didn't realize that you could major in guitar. That was just not something we knew down where I came from. So I
Me
was
neither.
majoring in percussion, and I found out they said like one of my friends was a guitar major, Scott Lutz, and he's like, you should probably try this out. And he gave me my first classical lessons, and I kept on. I got into the studio and did it. However, throughout my career as an undergrad, I was still participating in all the instrumental ensembles: band, choir, orchestra, salsa band, and mariachi band, because there wasn't really a large guitar ensemble. So while my primary instrument was guitar, I still was involved in the percussion world. And so when I graduated college, I was able to get a job as a percussion director at Eagle Pass High School. And I did that for a year, then went back to San Marcos and got a job there teaching, again, beginner band, got a as intermediate. And as the job morphed, kept on going through the band route, doing percussion, wind ensemble, all those different groups. So finally, the school district pulls me in a couple of years ago and says, hey, we want to get this mariachi thing started. We want to do it right. And spent a couple of hours talking with the superintendent and said, well, we have to do this. We have to hire an actual teacher. We have to go put it as a part of the curriculum. So finally, we got it started. I was hired. That was cool. But then I approached my principal and said, hey, by the way, you guys want a mariachi, but we don't teach guitar players. We can pull trumpet players from the band. We can pull violinists from the orchestra, but we don't teach guitar players. And they kind of said, well, don't they just kind of play, on the student body? And I'm like, no, absolutely not. So my principal is fantastic. She basically said, how much do you need? What do you want? And I asked for a certain amount. And I said,
Wow.
this is what I need to make happen. We need guitar players. So we're going to start guitar classes. And she goes, okay, go ahead and do it. And so through mariachi, we were able to start a classical guitar program for the kids that don't want to be in mariachi. You need 4 or 5 kids in the mariachi rhythm section, tops. But there's the first year we had 50 kids sign up for classical guitar. So what were we gonna do? Tell them to go away? Absolutely not. That's where you guys and the ensemble format came in, and we're having a blast right now doing it. We're on our completing our second year, and the program is exploding in a fantastic way. So I'm very excited. Anyways, long story short, that's how I got here. So super fun.
Well, it's a little, just slightly off topic from today's specific topic, but I think it's interesting to note that, Juan, you're in your second year of running this program. It's growing leaps and bounds as far as numbers, and you're also sort of taking a leadership role in starting middle school programs,
Yes.
Middle school feeders, and it's really an example of what can happen when everyone rallies around this idea of guitar class and guitar ensemble, where you're in a district with resources and you have a wonderful administration.
A great admin that says, okay, let's do this. They've loved what we've done at, with the concert and sight reading festival, and they were astounded. They're like, we have no idea you could do that. Yeah. I'm like, well, now you can. So they're like, okay, what else do you need us to do for you?
Right.
So,
and Juan's referring to yearly concert and sight reading event that we have for guitar ensembles, really all across Texas. They're invited, but mainly Central Texas. And we have typically, well, this year we had 45 ensembles come in, mainly from Central Texas, and they do a stage program for adjudicators, and they go into a sight reading room and read a piece that they've never seen before over basically a 10-minute period. And that sort of brings me to a nice segue of what we're here to talk about today, which is teaching notation. And sight reading is certainly a part of that. Sight reading is a positive symptom of music literacy and our students understanding notation. But it's a tricky thing on the guitar for a number of reasons. It's even trickier in a classroom format. And there are just a number of obstacles and a number of practices that we see teachers engaging in that I think if we create a discussion around it, it'll help us all sort of get some focus and think about what's most important. For those of you who are familiar with guitarcurriculum.com and our sort of core philosophy, it is that we teach music first. We want our students to understand the feeling of what it means to play music, to engage in that music making moment to moment, to play something beautiful, and to really do it from those very first stages. So we avoid what we would call a lot of prerequisite information. So we don't teach a ton of scales. We don't teach, face, and Every Good Boy Does Fine. And we learn the entire staff and all of our rhythms before we go to the guitar. That's just not how we do things. So we like to pair any new literacy item that we want our students to learn. And a small thing like learning a single note, we want that to be associated with the music that they're playing, and for there to be a really good reason to learn that skill. So for example, in level 1 of guitar curriculum, we're really learning how to read the open strings on the top 3 strings, as well as the bass strings a little bit. So those core kind of quarter note, eighth note rhythms and on open strings, those are what's most important. So the rep that's in the music library in level 1 is going to reflect that skill. And so that's a very small thing. We're only going to teach that top space E, that middle line B, and that second line G. And we're only going to teach, quarter, eighth, half, kind of these core rhythms. And we're going to do it in relation to playing the music. It builds connection, it builds purpose with learning these skills. So I'm going to turn to Jeremy here. Jeremy, can you describe a little bit, just day-to-day, your engagement with students, and then maybe something you think about broadly when teaching literacy?
Yeah, I think probably one of the most important things to in order to be successful at this is something that we talk about all the time, especially I think it's been brought up multiple times in a couple of these webinars, especially in our management one that we did last month.
Classroom management, like behavior management. Yeah.
But that refers to fixing individuals and working, always like throughout the entire class period, calling out individuals to ask them to do something that they'll feel successful at. And I think if you have control of the class and you're running the class this way, where you're always asking that of the kids, not asking them to raise their hands and volunteer, but to actually address it.
To do it.
Yeah, to do it. But also never doing that in a way where you're trying to have a gotcha moment or whatever. You don't call on a kid unless you know they're going to be successful. But you want to make sure that you're calling on every kid at some point and making
not that they can do it without thought.
Exactly.
It's that this is something that needs to be reinforced. What you're asking a student to do is not beyond their capability, but it might take a second to work it out and actually do it. So you get to navigate that moment where there's a little tough thing, but then we push through it.
But I think what's most important about that too is that it keeps the kids on on guard in a
Sure.
way. Like it keeps them a little bit more engaged, thinking, oh, at any minute.
Not afraid, but engaged.
Exactly. Like I could be asked to get up and do this. That over time turns into, I hope I get asked to do this today. But it's kind of that kind of setup or dynamic in the class that allows you to start really kind of pushing through the struggle that happens sometimes when we're teaching literacy. But it also keeps the expectations in check so we can move in a much more sequential manner and never really overloading the kids.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I will say, so Jeremy and I do consulting. We work with, just this year, the two of us have probably seen close to 100 guitar programs locally and across the country. And so we see a lot of teachers working with beginner and intermediate level ensembles where literacy is a big part, is the language that we're speaking in the classroom. But inevitably there are, a certain percentage of the students that are not able to read at all, or are not reading at the level that is required to play the music that they're working on. So from a basic standpoint, the culture and the psychology of your classroom is flawed when you have a small or large number of your students who fundamentally cannot do what you're expecting them to do. And that's really where the impetus for this webinar is, because fundamentally we want all of our students moving forward, both in their thinking and in their behaviors, in their playing and their knowledge. So, our classes are really a bell curve in general, in skill and understanding of music theory and knowledge. So you have really high performing, a lot of people in the middle, and you have some students that are struggling different ways. And our goal is not to get everybody reading in fifth position at the exact same time. Our goal is to just be moving forward with everyone. And that starts with knowing the skill level and the knowledge of your students coming in to your program. So one of the first things I'd like to talk about, which is something that we see a lot of, is a misunderstanding on the teacher's part of where their students' reading level is coming into the class. So for example, a middle school teacher who has new sixth grade students coming in from an elementary school might be operating under the assumption that those students know quarter notes and half notes, and they understand the staff, and their only job is to really teach where the notes are on the guitar. It almost never is the case. And it's not because elementary school teachers aren't doing their job. It's because everyone needs everything reinforced in these beginning years. So a really clear idea of where your student is, and I would say the safest way to go about it is to assume that they know nothing. And your students that are in orchestra as well as guitar, or who do have a really good understanding, are gonna come up to meet the challenge, and you'll see, oh, they can do this. So let's challenge them a little bit more. One, how do you deal with an incoming new class of what you would call beginner guitarists, even though they're at different levels? How do you deal with understanding where they are in their understanding and their knowledge of notation?
Okay, so my perspective is a little, there's two parts to it, because I have taught a lot of middle school throughout my career in high school. And it's the same thing when you said beginners. When I was teaching at the middle school, I just assumed that they didn't know. It's really what it was. That was the safest way for me to do it, and start everybody from scratch and just kind of fill in the gaps as we go along. But that was the best thing. That's the way I approached it with middle school specifically. Our elementaries, they're great, but they didn't have a unified we do Kodai. We don't, there was nothing like that set in stone or set up. So we just had to assume, like you said, they don't know what this is. So we just started from scratch. Okay, guys, let's sit down. And it's funny you mentioned because this is one of the things that I am not liking already about the way we taught notation in the band world. The first 2 weeks was the kids did not handle an instrument,
Mhm.
even, but that was, to me, that bothered me because that was the whole point of being in the class.
It's punishing,
Yeah,
right?
it is.
Like,
It
what
is.
are we doing?
And we'd sit there and do theory for 2 weeks, and okay, here's the 5 lines, here's the four spaces. Okay, we're good, boy, just fine. All of that, and we just throw all this information at the kids, which in the first 2 weeks they weren't going to remember it anyways, especially sixth graders.
And they're not applying it.
Exactly. There's no direct connection to what they're doing. So we found that we lost a lot of the kids. Just the first 2 weeks, they were just bored. So with one of my percussion classes, I took the ACG approach and said, we're going to play the first day. And I had those kids hooked the entire year. And like you mentioned, just sequentially kind of giving them the information that they needed, but assuming that they didn't know anything was the best way to go. Now, high school, I've got a kind of a challenge this year in a great way, because right now I am going to get a class of beginners as freshmen. However, I do know that a ton of them have already told me we're in band, we're in choir, we're in orchestra. It wasn't quite our thing, but that's all that was available. So I really think what all those kids that have that prior experience, I'm going to flat out just talk to them, hand out like a little diagnostic test. What do you know? What are the lines of the spaces? And as soon as I can, just get the instrument in their hands and teach them the guitar rather than how to read, and getting them to play music immediately. And just honestly, a lot of self-assessment, and kind of that first week, be like, what are they successful at? What are they not successful? Where do I have to fill gaps? But that's going to be a challenge that I'm going to face. I'm not going to be calling you guys plenty, obviously. But that's, like I said, I've got kind of a twofold answer to that, just because of where I've kind of been doing things.
It's so interesting. You made the comment, I'm going to teach the guitar.
Yeah.
And I think for many teachers, guitar and otherwise, teaching to read and teaching the instrument are two separate things.
Yeah.
And students pick up on that, right? And you mentioned they come in the first day and they're like, I want to play guitar.
Absolutely.
What is this other thing? They don't understand that is playing guitar. So the more that you can pair the act of reading with the understanding that this is playing the guitar, the more it's a holistic approach, and that's going to be a part of their learning process throughout. What we find a lot of the time is that without really thoughtful assessment, you get students who can learn by rote in secret, right? So they're listening to the things going on around.
They're watching their buddies right next to them. Oh, he's putting his finger here. Okay, yeah, let me do that too.
Right.
And they're not really.
What I find really interesting too is that they'll actually work out a complex system on their own, where it'll be like 4-3, like they'll be writing, like writing fractions all over their music,
right?
Just basically like a shorthand version of tab, or they'll write letter names above the notes, which really, like, if you think about that, that's actually a really complex process to go about.
It's harder than reading music.
It's much harder than reading music. And even reading tablature is harder than reading music.
Yeah.
Because there's so much, it's more about like kind of sitting down and figuring out a puzzle, as it is to actually like react to something that's on the page and being able to state or play what it is right there off the bat.
You're missing, when you do it that way, you're missing the key point, which is reading music in time, understanding while you are playing. And that's the hardest thing. I mean, we can really teach anyone to look at something, some sort of symbolic representation of music, go back to the guitar, mess around, and get it.
Right.
But that's not what we're asking them to do. The magic is when you can look at it, see it, and play it. Not perfectly, but that you have an understanding, a holistic understanding of what the notes are, when they happen, and you can learn so much quicker. That process becomes reinforcing over time to where they want to learn how to read, and they want to learn how to read better. So that's a really interesting point.
And often, a lot of times too, if it's happening efficiently, they'll be able to find the note and play it before they're actually able to tell you what pitch it was.
Right. Exactly. Let's see. like I said, the way we teach new notes is as they are needed, as they are learned. There's purpose, there's expression involved with this sort of two-dimensional understanding of where and what the note is. The expression and the musicianship is the outcome. It's the purpose. It's the reason we learn that note. Sight reading is a huge part of reinforcing that. And just to, one of the biggest problems that we see with sight reading is that we're doing too much too quickly.
Oh yeah.
And so just to sort of get that out of the way, the most successful programs that we see that are sight reading really well are at the very beginning stages, sight reading one measure, two measures at a time, very, very simple rhythms and notes, and moving so slowly through that process. Sight reading is a thing we do culturally. It's just a thing we do every day in our classroom. So it doesn't have to progress at this really high pace. It's just something that you do. So in those first levels, we have on guitarcurriculum.com some single line reading. And we might do, like one or two actual examples every day. It takes 2 or 3 minutes to go through that. There's going to be some mistakes, and mistakes are fine.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's about the doing it.
Yeah.
And so you'll see on your screen right now, we've got, just a couple of really simple, G. This is the first note we're going to learn. They're playing it with their thumb. We've got a couple of things to understand. I don't care if they know that every line and space is a different note at this point. I need them to know that you play with your thumb, that's the third string, the note is G, and we're going to rest on that fourth beat. We're going to stop. So when we think of traditional sight reading, it's not going to be perfect the first time. I might play through this 4 or 5 times to make sure everyone's stopping on that rest, to make sure that it's the correct right hand finger, that they know that this note is G. And like I said, 5 minutes in each class. And through level 1, we might spend, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 weeks, doing these open string, sight reading, simple rhythms. And we're doing it every day. Juan, how do you deal with sight reading in your classes?
So I like to do it 2 ways, actually. And a lot of it has, if you can go back to that first sheet or whatever. I like the way it's laid out. I love it. The first page, for example, the kids, the rhythm's all the same. I like to break it up where we're either reading notation or we're reading rhythm, not both at the same time, not just yet. And that's where I love this first. The first 3 lines, it's the same rhythm every single time. So once the kids understand the rhythm on the first one, now they're more worried about where, what string they're playing. Is it the G, the B, or the E? And I love that. Okay, so I'll break up sight reading into that. We're just going to read notes, just the pitches, maybe even just like whole notes, and but make sure the rhythm's all the same. Now, I also like to do where we're doing different rhythms. So I didn't bring anything, but for example, the Mark Wessel's book, there's an appendix in the back that very beautifully sequentiates. I just made that up, by the way. Sequentiates. Yeah, it's just the way it lays out rhythms.
And this is a percussion book.
This is a percussion book. The Haskell is also fantastic about that. Percussion band directors out there will know this one. And all you do is worry about rhythm. There's not even a metronome on for the first really couple of weeks. It's just, hey, and we're not even really worried about tone at this point or what note. Hey, just plug the string at the right time. And then as they're getting better about it, then I'll put on the metronome like at 60. Now we got to do a little bit faster. Now it has to be, a little more structure to it. Then after they get real comfortable with that, then we're going to start moving those notes around little by little. But yeah, I do like to do it in 2 folds, but the same way you mentioned as well. At the most we do we're going to sight read a 4 measure little line, and we're going to do measure by measure by measure. And if it takes us 4, 5, 6 minutes, then so be it. But as long as they do it, pretty well and pretty correct, Another thing that I like to do is I like to just write on random things,
Mm-hmm.
not something that
Just on a dry erase board or something.
yeah, because otherwise here guys, I printed out a packet for you guys. We're gonna sight read from it every day. Well, some of them are gonna go through and just read the whole packet the first day.
Yeah,
and
which
then,
is not necessarily a problem.
Yeah,
And,
but now they're not sight reading.
yeah,
Exactly.
So we'll write something on the board. Here you go. Let's go through this and just keep it random.
yeah. I oftentimes I'll ask kids to give me notes and rhythms. So I'll put 4 blank measures up, and I'll say, give me a time signature, 3/4. Give me a note and a note value, B eighth note. Give me a note and a note value.
Right.
Or I won't even put measure lines in there. And I won't
Right.
put any sort of time signature in there because that's all extraneous information.
It really
Exactly.
is.
Yeah,
It's
we
too
just-
much.
So we'll just have a line of quarters and eighths or whatever it is, and they, maybe they change pitches, maybe they don't.
Yeah.
And the other thing I'll do is oftentimes accompany. So just to sort of get a harmonic foundation underneath what they're doing. So if we're playing a lot of G's and B's over and over again, and you're in, minute 80 of a 90-minute class, hearing that droning G can be somewhat hypnotic. But so I'll play some just basic chords, and if you're able to do that on your instrument, that can be nice.
Yeah, I think is one thing to think about when we're teaching beginning, like that early stages of music literacy, is the goal is we're trying to get these kids to track along the music that's written. And I like that you're bringing up so much about this, that you told us about this this percussion method, because like we were talking earlier, I feel like in my experience, like 80 to 90% of a reading mistake is mostly rhythmic.
Yes.
Like the rhythm will derail it far more than missing the pitch.
Yeah.
The pitch is the easy part. So like when I first start teaching notation, and even just like especially like in middle school or even in high school, this works too. A lot of times I'll just put up either a quarter or 2/8 notes projected up onto a screen or something, and then just turn on. Lately I've been using the Jackson 5 and just getting like a nice beat going and then flipping between the two. The kids just clap and they have a really good time with that.
Oh, okay. So they're listening to recorded. There's a very predictable beat. And so you'll say, let's clap quarter notes.
I won't even say it. Sometimes I'll just put a quarter note up on the board and then just start clapping, and they'll follow along. Everybody will just get into it. Then I'll flip it over to an eighth note.
That speaks to another issue that I see a lot with beginning students, which is there's always at least a couple of students in a class that don't have an internal sense of pulse, that even if they knew exactly what the rhythm was and the note value was, they can't put that note right where it needs to be. So what that exercise does is it starts to train that internal sense of beat and pulse as well.
Sometimes it takes the instrument out of the equation too.
If I may interject real quick, this year's one of my classes, one of the first things that I realized real fast, they did not have a unified sense of beats. I was obviously getting way ahead of myself, and they couldn't play what I was asking them to do. And I realized, wow, I asked the kids, can we all just clap together? And they couldn't do it. So the way I solved that, and this is funny you say that, the first thing, the percussionist in me says, bring out the metronome. All right, bring out the Long Ranger marching band. Let's do it, right? Of course, but the kids they're such a tiny little click, 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 and the kids are trying to react to it. But as soon as you put on AC/DC, as soon as you put on Stand Alive, you put something that they've heard in their lives. They're like, oh, you mean like this, sir? I was like, yeah, do that forever.
Yeah.
So I like to use that as well to get them to just have a sense of internal tempo. Most of them really do.
Yeah,
from my experience.
Yeah, and then you can go from there by putting just like a whole set of rhythms up in front of them, and just clap the rhythm with the pulse of the music that they're listening to.
Absolutely.
But
I think so. One of the challenges that we haven't mentioned yet are specific to the guitar, and I want to just chat about that for a second. One of the toughest things about reading on the guitar is the fact that your pitch hand is out of sight. So the thing that's dictating the note that you play is in your peripheral vision. You actually don't have like visual access to where that note is. So that's why we've all seen our students do this. You know, they lean the guitar over so you can see it.
Or even on the right hand, their fingers on the wrong
Right.
string, or they're plucking the wrong string. Like, no, mijo, it's the second one. Yeah, okay.
Yeah. And so there's a huge learning curve to physically understanding where your fingers are. All the more argument to simplify what it is that we're doing for a long period of time to get that stability and that anchor in the right hand. Everything in guitarcurriculum.com in those first couple of levels, we call it, fixed finger right hand. So you're always going to be on 3 adjacent strings, usually on the top 3 strings in those early moments. So the longer you stay there and reinforce that, the better they're going to be at understanding where that G is. So it's always in my thumb right now. That B is always in my eye finger right now. So that'll be another thing to consider. So, and then there's, we always bring this up as guitarists, which is, an E is not an E is not an E. No. It's at different places. Now, most of our students, at least in those early stages, are not at a place where they're actually worried about shifting and upper position and really true left-hand fingering concerns like we would see with more advanced solo pieces. But they know, and they're also looking at this fretboard that is so overwhelming.
It's just a giant grid, lines. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's like what I don't know. I want to say it's like Ferris Bueller's Day Off or something, where someone's writing an equation and it just goes up and up and up, and like it's overwhelming. And so it's one of those 80s movies, but it's like it's panic inducing to see all of this real estate.
It's overwhelming,
and especially when you look at a classical guitar too, because there's not. You don't see any of the reference points on the frets.
Yeah.
Not only like reference points. Well, to go with the reference points on a piano, on a keyboard. Yeah, you have all these things laid out, but at least you have the 2 black keys, 3, all the accidentals. So there is some reference points in there. Even with a marimba, same thing. I keep going back to percussion because I just taught so much of that. But because you do have the specific reference points, but when you put a beginner on one, they just see all these bars and they're like, which is the F? That one. It's just overwhelming sense of information. Not only that, but like what you were saying, we're also we're kind of detached. I mean, we do have our right hand on it, our left hand on it, but most band instruments, for example, have 3 points. And like you mentioned, an E's and E's and E on a trumpet. Yeah, you're holding the thing. You got 1, and that's the G, man. That's the only one that's there. So it's really, really easy to figure out. Okay, that's the one I'm going to play. Guitar, like you said, has so much information on it. Well, what do I press here? What is this? What is that? And same thing. Kids get overwhelmed with that.
It's something I hear all the time when starting notation is they say, Mr. Markham, the lines are the strings, right? So
yes,
and it's just confusing. Because they're used to this direct association, whether they've seen tablature or not. It makes sense.
Or the opposite. The high notes are on top on the staff, and the high notes on the guitar are down towards the bottom.
Right.
They're like, oh no. But
when I say high and low, they get confused.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So all that to say, there are many ways to confuse the message and to be overwhelmed with information. So all the more reason that we should have a systematic, really paced approach to introducing new notes and rhythms, and to do as much of it as you possibly can, to the point where everybody's just so comfortable, and then we can add something new. Even mentioning, like, I know we're learning E, but hey, look at this. Isn't this cool? We can play this E here and here and here. That's a piece of information that's not helpful right now for your students.
Yeah.
So something to consider.
I think too, though, like the biggest pitfall that we probably need to make sure that we talk about too is that, spending time working on this is really important, but we can't spend all the time working on it.
Oh,
And a lot
the
of times,
contrary.
and that is
Yeah.
quite the pitfall that we see a lot of people fall into, this idea of like drill and kill for hours, hours of class per week. It's all that we spend time on. I think these things work great if you're seeing a class every day, 10 minutes a day of that class period at max.
Yeah, I was gonna say I'd probably do closer to 5.
Yeah.
Yeah, just to keep it fresh in their brains, and then okay, now let's go work on our concert pieces and the expression and the artistic part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that speaks to the priorities that we create as teachers. Mine's the music. I mean, it's always going to be the expression part of the music, and that's the fun part. So I think, if you're spending, hours and hours, that means you're doing it in isolation, which probably means you're doing more than is being connected to the music that you're playing. And it's just too much. But consistency is the key. Every day, yes, a little bit.
Yeah.
A lot of times I think if you feel that's all that you're spending a lot of time just on sight reading and doing notation exercises and stuff, that that should be like a red flag to yourself, thinking like, okay, why am I falling back on something, that one specific thing? Is it because this is the only thing I'm comfortable doing? Or to really just think about ways you can change things up in the way that you're teaching. Absolutely. And also kind of reevaluate what your goals are for the class.
For sure. So we've talked just a couple of points to kind of reiterate what we've talked about. When you're teaching notation in those very early moments, understand where your students are in their knowledge of how to read, what they're capable of, before you put a bunch of stuff in front of them. Consistency, sight reading every day, very small things every day. And as your students develop, as they get more skills, that sight reading may turn into upper position sight reading or ensemble sight reading, where you've got your parts playing different parts and you're sight reading in a true piece. But you've got so much time to get there. Pace yourself with all of these new skills, and they should align with what you're trying to do musically as well. The last sort of point that I want to bring up is something that Jeremy touched on earlier, but it's varying your assessment and of your students and how they show you they know how to read, and doing that with individuals. So that means asking your students to say note names in rhythm. If you're a ta tiki kind of person and you're doing that, then have them speak on those syllables. Have them sing, right? It's not comfortable, but I've seen Jeremy over here have an entire class of 30 kids singing their pitches. It's not beautiful, but it's giving them an understanding internally of what those pitches are doing.
If I may throw something out there about that specifically, I have found that you don't have to tell the kids, by the way, kids, we're going to sing in pitch. You just start doing it. And they just kind of start following you. We're going higher, we're going lower. And I found that when I do that, like I said, it creates a safe learning environment, and not everyone's a great singer, and that's fine. But at least they start being able to look at the music and audiating it without actually playing it. And that's, I always found that like really fun. You just start singing, they'll start doing it with you. It's like, oh, okay, cool.
Absolutely.
Let's keep doing that.
It's so important. I think ultimately, as students progress and as I've progressed as a musician, singing melodic parts and the solos that I play helped me to understand how to shape them and do what I need to do with them. And I always tell this story because it's one of the most embarrassing moments of my life. I was in a master class with Ricardo Cobo. You might have been there. It might have been.
Oh, yeah, I think so.
So I'm playing the Ponce Valse and the drop D.
Oh, yeah, I remember.
And Adam Holtzman, my professor, he'd make me sing, constantly every day. And I was playing the piece very poorly, and I knew it. And I was struggling to get through and to connect. And Ricardo said, put the guitar down and sing. And I sung, and the melody, and it was actually really nice. I did a good job. And he said, "Well, you are a far better singer than you are a guitarist."
Wow.
To your credit, though, like everybody in the room was kind of taken aback.
Yeah, it
Because
was
actually
decent singing.
You sang like a
Yeah.
well-trained singer.
Yeah, but it helped me to understand how to
Mhm.
shape. I hadn't quite gotten to the point where I could transfer that to the
Your
piece,
instrument, yeah.
but I was doing something physically that was too
Mhm.
hard for me. So that's another point, I heard it in my mind. I couldn't physically do it.
Mhm.
So when we think about assessing our students' reading, it needs to be coming from all of these different directions, and that includes, your sort of stereotypical flashcards and your stuff that you're writing on the board.
Yeah.
And I do have my students go to musictheory.net and do some just really kind of simple computer-based exercises, but I'm also asking them individually to sing and play, to clap rhythms, to say the note names, and really coming at it from every possible angle, and doing that every day. So when we do it different ways, we're catering to the individual student. We're understanding where those gaps in knowledge are, because maybe they can clap the rhythm, but they can't say the note names and the rhythm at the same time.
Exactly.
And so there's all kinds of things to work on. And as a teacher, I'm seeking that out. I'm seeking those little moments out where I can fix something. So any other sort of advice you guys can think of, or maybe some anecdotes from your day-to-day, some advice on how to get your kids reading confidently?
One thing I discovered I wanted to do, I started setting them up in such a way where they can't copy each other's hands. I had a class a couple of years back, percussionists, and man, they were sounding great. We were moving along. I was like, oh my god, this is awesome! I'm a great teacher. Then I put something new in their stands, and they couldn't do it. But turns out they were watching the one little girl who knew exactly what she was doing, and they're just copying everything. So I realized that guitar kids can do the exact same thing. So as crazy as it sounds, I'll be like, all right, everyone, you kind of turn around, where you can't see what your buddy's doing, and then do it. It's like I said, it's crazy exercise, but do a measure, do a four measure thing, and see who is really reading, who is not. You get to really fast like
Right.
that.
Mhm.
The traditional arches, I like it, but it gives them plenty of options of who to copy.
Oh, for sure.
And I tried to. In fact, this year I tried two straight rows facing each other, and of course that made it worse. 'Cause
Yeah.
they're just really looking at the person in front of them. So I found that changing up the setup like that can help as well, because it's just like I said, they can really fall easily into that rut.
And those kids, we all have them in our class that are really fantastic at learning by rote or by ear. And they're going to look at the students around them, and they can do things that, I could never do, which is memorize giant portions of music, just based on their ear and the person and watching the person next to them. And so when you allow that to go on for a long period of time, two things happen. The kid does not learn how to read. They also learn how to not value reading, because they're like, I can do this.
Yeah.
And us as teachers are like, well, no, you can't really. I mean, you can kind of execute it, but you can't do anything on your own. Like, there's no autonomy to what you're doing. So I see that all the time.
It's funny you bring that up. There's kids who you can reach a very high level of performance without having to read in music whatsoever. And I hear of certain schools and certain kids in the all state bands, and they got to the all state band, right? But then they have to rely on the person next to them. It's like, because when they put the music in front of them, they don't know what's going on. So, but for whatever reason, those kids, whatever they were rote taught or they figured it out,
right?
That they can do that. It's just in the end, they still have to be able to do it,
right?
Because you put them on their own and they just can't. In fact, it reminds me of my audition for college when Mr. Fluman, Professor Fluman for A&M Kingsville, put a little four measure, 8 measure, half notes, quarter notes thing, and I couldn't do it. I was so used to just kind of working hunt and peck on a 4-mallet keyboard and stuff like that I never really learned how to do it. Oddly enough, I never really learned how to read music until I started playing guitar.
Really?
Yeah. And that's when I was like, oh look, this E is always this E right now. This is
Yeah.
this is that. And that's really having both hands on there really helped.
Mhm.
As opposed to like the separation we mentioned earlier. There's the disconnect, physical disconnect of the instrument. Yeah.
I think one important thing to always remember too is just taking the time to be like extremely clear in your daily language, especially with the guitar, because very often kids will associate a G with P.
Right.
Yes.
Because they know that their thumb is going to be fixed on that third string, but they'll start to say
That's a P note.
Yeah, that's a P note,
Yeah.
or that's an M note, and that just comes from a teacher seeing the progress and maybe turning a blind eye and like, all right, things are good. Look how, but being very clear about that, but also asking kids to say and play, or just say note names that or when you're just kind of introducing a piece, you ask a specific student, say, okay, what is the name of the first note or the first pitch on this measure, and then how many beats does it get, or what type of note is it?
Right.
But always kind of being very clear about the way you're referencing things.
Clarity of language is always something that we need to be on top of and keeping in mind. I want to take just a moment. I'm not going to ask you to play, Jeremy. I know we talked about that. But I want to just show you what I do in those first moments, which is in level 1, we've got our beginner class. We've played a couple of pieces by rote. Maybe that's Blue Magic, maybe that's Spy Tune or Violet Crown or Rain or Echo Canyon. Those like beginning pieces that were ostinato based that we're learning by rote. But it's really time to read now. And that might be week 2 or it might be week 6 or wherever you are. It just depends. But I'm gonna really scrap all of the extraneous stuff that we need. I know my students know that P on third, I on second, M on first. We've done a little bit of work in knowing the letter name for our individual fingers, but we really haven't done any work on rhythm. So I usually put this up on a board. And I'll have my students play. They'll either clap or they'll play thumb, M, or I on a single finger. And I'll say, every time I tap the board here, you're going to play a note. So we'll go ta, 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 ta. And I can really align them vertically, make sure we're in time. But they know every time they see this note, we're playing. Okay, ta, ta. Then we go down here. Every time you see this note, you're going to go ta, 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 play it twice every time I point to it. So I do it, the group plays together, ta, 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 ta. I say, okay, I'm going to be up here or down here, and we're going to play the appropriate rhythm. So I'll go ta, 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 ta. Right? We'll do that again. And they're reading the correct rhythms. And of course, I'm going over the moon because they're reading these notes and they're doing it at the right time. And then we go to the first 2 measures of meditation number 1. And all I have to say at this point is when you see that note that's up there in that top space, the one that's higher with the M finger, that's your E. You're going to play that with your M. Down, the one on the middle line, that's a B. You're going to play that with your I finger. So we're going to play it right now. And we go straight from playing the rhythm, which was correct when we just did it, and transferring it to the pitch, M, I, or E, B, B. And they play it correctly for the most part right there. And then I'd say, okay, let's speak the note names now while we play it. E, B, B, E, B, B. And then I say, oh, we got to play soft, but then we got to play even softer in that second measure. And it just sort of goes from there. I'm asking them to do something very simple, which is know when to play a quarter note, when to play an eighth note, and which finger to use. We're recognizing that it's E's and B's, and that's all we have to know. Usually in that first class period, we might get all the way through guitar 1 and that second line. I'll play guitar 2 and 3, but they're being asked to go from page to the guitar, and it's successful, and they're doing it, and they know the notes and they know the rhythm. And then it's just replicating that experience with slightly more difficult things a little bit every day. So I hope that helps a little bit with just that first exercise. That's one moment, but it works for me for sure. Anything else that you guys would like to add to this conversation?
Well, I think it's worth mentioning the sight reading that's on the guitarcurriculum.com website.
I just discovered that this year, by the way.
So we have two categories of it on here. Like, one is the it's kind of just single line sight reading, and it kind of works like your traditional method book. But like, if it's in level 3 or level 2, or depending on the level, it's going to be asking you to do things that goes along with the ensemble repertoire that the kids are going to be doing at that level. So it's never asking the kids to do something that's out of left field.
Right. So for example, levels 2 and 3 are going to have sight reading, primarily open strings and fingered notes on the first 3 strings. So that's all you're learning. Level 4, we'll do some sight reading with low notes, the bass notes under ledger lines, things like that.
But then we also have the trio sight reading as well. So this is ensemble sight reading, and this is generated from our concert and sight reading event that we do every year here in Austin, where we have to come up with level appropriate group sight reading. And they're also mapped to the guitarcurriculum.com ability levels. So again, this is a way to kind of practice both things. So you have the reinforcement for the individual, and then you can also put it in context with the entire group. And some of the pieces actually they're awesome pieces.
They're nice on their own.
They can be concert pieces on their own.
Hey, let me sing y'all's praises for a little bit on that, because I wasn't kidding when I said I just discovered that this year. For whatever reason, I just didn't click on it. But last year and the beginning of this year, I was using the actual curriculum pieces, level 1, level 2, and they're not the same. You guys know that.
Yeah.
And once I discovered a trio sight reading, that really is what I feel made the biggest difference in our success, especially with my second ensemble this year.
At the event, concert and sight reading event.
And all we did, like I said, I started with the first one, and about 3 weeks prior to it, said, all right, kids, we're going to go through the sight reading process every day. And just started at the first one and just kept going one every day. It took 10 minutes to get through it. And the way these are, like you said, they're laid out, I'm assuming these are the previous year's sight reading.
Yeah.
And this is nothing new in the band world. As soon as the sight reading is over, I think a couple of weeks later, it's available at RBC or JW Pepper, and every band director out there goes and buys the sight reading pieces. And you can probably go to any band hall and find just a library of just the sight reading pieces, and they're crucial for the success, especially of the assessment, the UIL festivals. Admin looks at that. So you get 1s there, you're doing great. You're getting 3s, you're gonna have a conversation. And to avoid that, I would strongly recommend people that want to go to the Concert Sight Reading Festival here, start with these. Yeah, they're absolutely great.
Yeah, so the one you're seeing now, Sunset Cycling by Jeremy, this is an advanced, so it says advanced levels 7 through 9. This is what you would call a class 6, or so it's the highest level of sight reading that our high school ensembles are going to do. You can see that there's upper position stuff. I think all of our 6A schools who are reading this piece did it beautifully this year. Not this year, but last year was when we had this piece. Because they're preparing, they know where they need to be. So these trio sight reading pieces really give you kind of a nice framework. Don't think of going through piece 1 to the final piece in a year. Think about like the entire study from, say middle school through high school or something. Yeah, and I have, you know, professors from around the country who are getting auditions from our students in Austin. Really, they are really surprised at the level of sight reading because they've done this from day one. You know, they're 12 years old walking into a class, and they sight read every day until they're a senior in high school, and they go to these auditions where sight reading is a requirement, and they're reading multilinear music in different positions with shifting, and it's just comfortable, and they're not sweating it.
Yeah. So, I mean, you think about those of us that came from, you know, a classical guitar performance background, when you're walking the halls of the practice rooms at a music school, the amount of the ability of your peers that are playing that are there that play clarinet or flute or whatever, like they can just sit down immediately and perform 3 pages of music. And I remember for me being like, I don't think I could ever do that.
It takes a lot longer for
And
us.
it really and you think about it, this was part of what drew me into really wanting to teach guitar in the high school and middle school level, is that the difference is that person playing clarinet has been doing it since at least 6th grade and has been reading music since then.
Also, I mean, piano is another good
Mhm.
comparison, because you think of an accompanist, someone who can sit down and just play anything, and you've got multilinear music. You're using all of your fingers. It's complex. You know, a clarinet's going to be reading a single line. I'm not saying it's easy,
Yeah.
but it's easier, right? I think. But piano, which has just such a history of pedagogy and sight reading, functionally, you need to be able to do that to accompany a choir or a vocalist or whoever, so they can sit down and do this. We're getting sort of where to some of our more advanced students can sit down and read like that. It's
sure.
very impressive.
Yeah, and usually I find myself in situations at a high school, especially with a more advanced group, where I'm trying to model a passage for them to help them, like show them the fingerings, and they're like, "Bro, I got it. It's fine.
You got this.
Like, like they're outside reading me." So, and that's because, you know, they've been able to come up through this system with that I did not, and now they can outside read me
better than me. So I know we're kind of running up against time here. Always, you can send questions to Jeremy, Eric, or I. It's our first name at austinclassicalguitar.org. And really, you know, I think if I was to put our conversation into, you know, one kind of statement, it's that reading should have a function. It should have a purpose. It should go slowly and small amounts, and it should be done every day.
Yes.
Yep.
Absolutely.
So that's sort of where we are. Thank you for tuning into this, and thank you for your teaching. Thanks.